This is our health equity logo. And this, for us, it tells our story. So our story says, in order for us to best help children, we need to help the family. So we need to support the parents and the child within the family unit. And we believe that every parent, child, every family has the right and deserves a nurturing, loving environment at home. We know that that is important in terms of helping children to grow up with positive mental health, physical health, and that those are necessary in order for our kids to succeed academically and longer term in terms of their career opportunities and economic opportunities. So we believe that this together helps bring stability for life. And that is what we are all about, the best start for families, a health equity approach. Our vision is for every child and adolescent to have a strong network of adult caregivers and professionals engaged in supporting their positive development within nonviolent families and peaceful communities. And most of you probably knew that coming in. So there are two things we want you to do when you get together with your paired person. First, we want you to think back, reflect back, and think of a happy memory of yourself from your childhood, an activity that you enjoyed doing. And that activity could have been riding your bike. It could have been reading a book. It could have been playing basketball with your brother, whatever it was. Think of that, an activity that was kind of special. And it's an activity that made you feel strong and happy, confident, and good about yourself. That's one. That's one thing you're going to share. First, one person will share, then the other person. And Nelson, as he puts you in your groups, will tell you if you're a 1 or a 2. Ones, you go first in the happy memory of the childhood activity. 2s, you're going to go first in this next one. The second activity is to remember an adult from your childhood that you particularly liked. And think about that adult. You know, maybe they made you feel loved. They made you feel cared for, but they definitely made you feel strong and good about yourself. Maybe they saw potential in you that no one else seemed to see. Maybe they saw more in you than you thought you had yourself. Think about who was that adult. And maybe it was when you were young. Maybe it's even a mentor that you had, you know, as a teen, you know, or more recently. But who was that adult? What we want to think about are, what were their special characteristics? How did they do that? So those are the two things you're going to share. But you're each going to share both. So ones, you go first on the activity, and then 2s go. And then 2s go first with the adult, and then the 1s go. How many of you found that the adult that you remembered back to was not a parent or a grandparent? Yeah. So usually we have more than half are not parents. And that's why do you think that sometimes we remember the people who made us feel strongest and best about ourselves as people who might not have been our parents? And sometimes the parents are, we know the parents are focused on all of those, you know, my priority as a parent is to make sure you're fed, you have a safe house, you've got clothes, you get to school every day, I get you your medical, you know, it's about all of the things that kids need, but not sometimes the idea of being a parent who's helping our kids have that positive mental, you know, feeling and development and that emotional kind of strength to feel beyond. And sometimes it's other people who can see that in our kids, but they're not the ones who are struggling to make sure that we're also safe every day, right? So sometimes a parent doesn't see that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, the parent role and the opportunities. So when you think about that parent, when you think about the parent or the adult that you identified, now think about yourself. Do you think that you have, you know, taken to heart those are characteristics that you've also emulated yourself, that these are characteristics that you are making sure that you're offering to your kids too? Because we have an opportunity when we reflect on this, right? to think, what was the most important thing about the adults in our lives? And when we think about it that way, we can think, am I doing it? Am I doing it well? Is that something I want to do better? All the kids need to be inside our zone of empathy because that's where kids will thrive. Outside of our zone of empathy, they're really at risk of looking to belong in places that might not be healthy. So these are the key concepts. And I'm going to ask somebody. So this is about the zone of empathy. Let's see, who have I not called on? Sherry, could you read the list that says if a child is outside the zone, how is a child perceived sometimes?
Sure. Outside the zone, the child is seen as an object, an empathic blockage, emotional withdrawal, and differences facilitate rejection, insufficient care, and abuse.
Thank you. So outside the zone, we know that a child is at risk and possibly, the parent-child relationship, there's a rupture there, and a child might actually seek to belong somewhere else where there may be higher risks. Whereas inside the zone, looking at who I haven't called, I think, Rachel, what about inside the zone? How is a child treated? Yes.
So inside the zone,
yes,
child as a person, empathetic identification, emotional availability, and sensitivity, sensitively adjusted caring.
For the child. So that's our goal, is to get our kids into our zones of empathy so that they also know it. They know that they belong there. And we can help kids with empathy, which helps them to be in our zone of empathy. It helps that relationship building by giving guidance. So one thing we can do is provide clear rules and principles. We just have to teach our kids. We don't do this because we don't bite people, because kids it's going to hurt them. And then they're going to cry. You're going to make them unhappy. And, helping them understand when you hit, how little kids sometimes even hit mom, they'll hit because they're learning about hitting. They're learning about, moving their arm, but they don't always put it together with that hurts mom. It's sometimes so as they get older, we can help them understand what their actions do and why they shouldn't. And we shouldn't get angry. We need to be firm, but we need to be pretty calm about it so that we can explain to them. Have you ever heard sometimes when kids are being yelled at, all they can hear is the yelling, not the words and not the message, right? Because they're pretty overwhelmed just understanding that this is a loud, yelling, angry thing going on. And it's pretty hard to focus on what that really means. So very important for us to be able to, be firm and to, show that we care about it. And by us helping kids understand why we want to do what's good, we're also helping our kids understand how to do right and how to do positive things for others. So one of the things that young kids often get is they're told what not to do. But so one thing we can encourage parents to do, and in our caregiver book, I think it's called Catch Your Child Doing Something Right or something like that. But it is finding what they're doing well and making sure we're focusing and building them up on those positives. You were helpful, generous, kind, and kids can feel this inside them and feel like, that's me. I am a kind person, and grow that, right? And develop further in these positive ways. Of course, our modeling is important. And what ICDP says is the most essential attribute is the existence of that warm and responsive relationship between an adult and a child. A loving, accepting, which we can take as unconditional love, a manner towards children that produces children with high rates of pro-social behavior because they love to learn others as they have experienced being loved. the zone of empathy and our guidelines here. You can see over on the right, there are the first 4 guidelines. So within the zone of empathy, where we have that empathic identification, here's where we introduce you to the guidelines. When we see the child as a person and the child is feeling loved and appreciated, we can use these guidelines. Showing love, the child feels love and they can reciprocate. Responding to a child's initiative, they feel understood and appreciated. So when we respond to their initiatives, they're understanding that this is something that's because it's positive and they're good and they're positive. The number 3, guideline 3, is verbal and nonverbal intimate dialogue. So when the child is feeling protected and they know we understand them, they feel loved and appreciated, then we can talk about things, sometimes things that are hard or just things that bring us closer. Also, we can give praise and confirmation. A child trusts us when we have them in our protective zone. They trust that we are sincere, that we are telling them things that are positive and good for them, right? So that's kind of a positive cycle that goes on within the zone of empathy. Children who are outside that zone, however, are not getting that same feedback. They're not building those positive relationships. And so it's outside that they could be at higher risk. And again, we have the opportunity to intervene and to sensitize parents as to the risks and the positive opportunities, and to help parents bring their kids in to that positive cycle. And we're going to talk about the positive cycle in just a moment. But first, we're going to look at, these were the first 4 guidelines. So within the 8 guidelines that Best Start has, these were the first 4. The next 4 are guidelines 5, 6, 7, 8 over in the column on the right. And here we're saying now the child feels appreciated and understood. Now here we're saying that in this protective zone, when the adult has empathy with the child's intentions and ideas and plans, the child feels understood, right? And even more supported in their actions. So these guidelines are sharing attention and focusing. We can do this, again, when the child feels close to us. We can describe and teach our children when they feel close. We can expand their understanding by giving it more explanations and really becoming a teacher with them. And we can also, ICDP's version of discipline is regulation. So it's setting limits, guiding actions, step by step, towards positive goals. We want our children to succeed. We want them to make the right choices. So we want them to learn how to be strategic and come up with good decision-making that will help them to do the right thing. So regulation is setting limits and guidance that guides their actions step by step to have successful decision-making and behavior and positive outcomes. It's not like they won't ever make a mistake. It's not like we won't ever have to have those natural consequences of, mistakes that they make. But this is always helping them understand how they can succeed whenever we can. And again, helping our kids if sometimes it might be a positive relationship, and then what? Your child turns 13 and all of a sudden they're off the deep end and you're like, what? This is not the child I had 3 months ago. And it's still, so now, there's a rupture. How do we bring the kids back? How do we help that parent bring that child back? Right? So it's all about bringing them back into that zone of empathy, protective zone. We've got some, so we'll do the yes cycle now then. So the yes cycle, remember in the zone of empathy, we said there was a yes cycle. And again, it's in your book, same pages. The yes cycle is that adult who is, if they're sensitized and they are responding sensitively, if you look on the right side, the caregiver is interpreting maybe the signals, initiatives, the conversation from the child. They're interpreting them in very positive ways. They're giving confirmations, exchanging positive, approving, expressive gestures. They're following the initiatives of the child, reacting to what the child does in a positive way, and leading, helping guide the child in a positive way. And so the part of the cycle is the child, then the parent. The child's interpreting the parent, what the parent has just responded, that they're interpreting that positively as well. And that what that might look like, you might see a parent and child who have visual contact. They're looking in each other's eyes. They're taking turns. They're sharing good feelings. And that can't go on all of the time. Sometimes there's a rupture, right? And so when that happens, we call that the no cycle or the negative cycle. There's the yes positive cycle, and then there's the no negative cycle. And here's where the parent might, if you look on the right, they might not follow and adjust to the initiatives of the child. They might not be exchanging positive, expressive gestures anymore. And when the parent is starting to do the negatives, if you look at the very top, where pretty much the parent might be a little bit out of control and just saying, don't do that and don't touch that. They're not really thinking about the impact of their words and their actions on the child at this time. They're just reacting to a situation, perhaps reacting to what's going on within themselves. So they're reacting in a very negative way. And so the child at the bottom is feeling rejected, right? They're feeling like, this person doesn't care about me. How could they be doing and saying and acting this way? And they can react by withdrawing, getting depressed, or with aggression and negative attention seeking, because they feel like maybe that's the only way they can get attention again. And so when there is this kind of adult insensitive imposition on the child, what it looks like again is there's no sensitivity toward the child, there's no empathy, but it also looks like there's little visual contact, there's gaze evasion. The parent isn't trying to connect with the child anymore necessarily. So has anyone ever seen a negative cycle? Anybody? Maybe a few of you have seen negative cycles happen. And so what we do is what ICDP does that I think is brilliant is they've diagrammed it out. They've diagrammed it out so that we can show a parent. Have you ever seen this, parent? Have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen this happen? And, it's natural. This kind of thing will happen, especially if we're upset, something happens, something's going wrong. Sometimes this is kind of a natural outcome of how we're feeling and how we respond. But when we know it, when we see it diagrammed like that, we also understand that we can change it. And that we can think, boy, I'm in this negative cycle right now, and there's no positive that's going to come out of this. I need to switch to a positive cycle. And so the positive cycle, back again, where now the caregiver says visual contact, let me interpret things in a more positive way. Maybe I have to ask questions so I understand better. How do I turn this into a situation where we can get closer again? Because I know that when I'm in a yes cycle with my child feels protected and safe. We communicate better. We have positive interactions, and my child is actually safer. So it's me as the adult. I can say I'm in a negative cycle. I know how to come back. And maybe it's very different with your different kids, right? There might be, you're in a negative cycle with your child, and it's your 11-year-old. All they want is a hug. And it might be your 13-year-old that needs a little time. You need to talk while you're doing the dishes. You need to take a walk. And it might be your 4-year-old who, you just need to say, we're going to read 2 stories tonight, not just one, because, mommy yelled and I'm sorry I yelled. And it might require saying, apologizing, and very often that is it's such a positive thing to do for a child, to let them know, I'm sorry. That was kind of rough. I shouldn't have responded that way. I'm sorry. I think I hurt your feelings, didn't I? How many of you had parents who apologized to you? How many of you had parents who apologized? Couple? So, not all parents modeled that for us. So with this program, again, it kind of brings it down to the basics and says, I may not have seen that, learned that, but I understand that there's power. If I can apologize to my child, we can interact positively again. We can build back up that positive protective relationship. This is really good for my child, and it's good for me. I know what I can do, and I know how I can do it. Right. And you might have to learn it for each child. And it might change at their different developmental levels as well. So it might be a hug worked when they were 12, but when they're 15, it might be something else as well. But we figure that out because we know that essentially it breaks down to these two diagrams and we can make this work. Children will thrive and be supported in positive development best when we're also supporting their parents in a positive environment and supporting the parent to thrive and develop as a parent. And so what we believe everyone has the right to is this loving, caring community, family, home environment, which brings that positive mental and physical health of both parents and children. It helps to result in academic success and ultimately economic opportunities, which again come back to that heart, which is stability for life. And this is what we work towards. So this is the big story, right? We may help with a little bit, but we're helping to create those positive environments that can result in all of these good things.